Hey guys, this is Valde from Moji here. Danish Counter-Strike is one hell of a drug, but so is Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Reflections, and my guest for this one is going to be Fair, who is an old school North American Counter-Strike pro. So actually, here's the thing, on my style of interview, right, I don't do the thing where it's like you ask people about when they're a little kid playing Mario, and then, like, oh, did your parents let you touch the PC? I don't do all that stuff, I skip that, like, that's for the birdsmith. But usually, I skip, like I say, the whole sort of, like, origin story. But in your case, actually, I don't think actually most people, even who were fans back in the day, know your origin story, because they only know players in Counter-Strike in NA when they get to the invite level. That's when you become somewhat famous. And at that point in time, back in the old days, either everyone was known or they had like a slow, gradual, like your rise to the top was pretty fast actually. So here's what's interesting is I was doing some research myself to get all the details squared away. And I myself didn't actually know this. So I want to ask you this. When I looked up all the info I could find, it said actually that you were even playing at some of the CPLs, which for fans are basically the equivalent to the majors. It said you actually went to some of the CPLs years before you got known actually, that you were with some of the West Coast teams like Death is Eternal and stuff like a couple of years before the big. Is this true? Were you actually around the scene? We just didn't know you?
That is correct. Yeah, my first CPL was with Die, which is Death is Eternal. I was asked to play, and they sent me out there with them. And although we didn't place very well, it was actually a really good experience to be exposed to the world tournament stage, and I think that's what helped out a lot in my future matches.
Because what I wanted to ask about that is we should set the scene actually for what the space you came from, which is you came specifically from the Californian Counter-Strike scene. And if people don't know, one thing that actually made the West Coast very unique compared to most other regions in the world, minus, funnily enough, like the Nordic region, is when everyone used to complain that like the reason Swedes are so good is they had like LAN cafes everywhere. What people don't know in America is people who were stuck in the middle of like the Midwest think that all of America was like barren for LAN cafes. There was a very vibrant LAN cafe scene in SoCal and NorCal, right? Which area were you in at the time? Because if people don't know, Death is Eternal, Rival, etc. At one point in time, these were essentially just teams of people who played at set LAN cafes and were friends like in real life, and then they made pro teams, right? So what was the circuit like when you came up? Like, I'm assuming this is where you came into CS, right?
Yes, absolutely. I learned what Counter-Strike was through PC cafes. Originally I had played Magic Cards. And Magic Cards, if you don't know, like it's a card game. And so I would go to tournaments on the weekends. And I was at a very young age. I can't even remember how old I was. But I would go there with my brother and my cousin. We'd play Magic Cards in the tournament. I wasn't very good. I didn't have a good deck. So I lost. And then I would end up, that comic store that held tournaments also had a PC cafe in it. So I would just go off into the back and I'd play some Half-Life and some StarCraft, and that's where I first started gaming for the most part. And then it kind of just took off from there, where in Orange County there were several cafes, and then Counter-Strike came out, obviously. So I played some Counter-Strike, not that much. And then a little bit later on, at about age like 13, 14, is when I really started playing Counter-Strike a lot. I'd go to the PC cafes. There was one PC cafe I would go to where every time I walked in there, the owner would say, "Let's play one-on-one. If you win, you get a pick of any of the candy." And I'd be like, "For sure." And I played a lot of one-on-ones that way and kept winning and taking all this candy. And so, yeah, the PC cafe scene was actually really heavy in Orange County, LA area. I ended up just playing so much at PC cafes that I would go to different PC cafes and hustle people one-on-one for money.
Okay.
I'm just a white guy, the scene was mostly, a lot of Asians. And so that,
did they just assume you sucked at the game then, as a result?
Correct.
I'm guessing, right? Okay.
Yes. And so I would kind of go in there and, take their money. There was one time where I actually was held up at gunpoint over it because they felt that I was hustling them. And I was so young at the time, like just scared out of my mind, but it didn't keep me away from the scene, and I continued doing what I was doing.
Funny thing is that actually is a perfect segue to a question I was going to ask you, which is an unusual detail, which is, again, if people only know the names in the server and they don't know the background, right, what they might not understand is one of the things I even thought back in the day when I saw you in all these teams from like Jin to Rival and all this, I was like, one of these does not belong in this pattern here, because if people don't know, almost all the people in that scene seem to be either Asian American, often Korean or Vietnamese or something, or they tended to be like Mexican, Latin American. In fact, that's the reason why I wasn't surprised when you told that story of being held up at gunpoint. Like, what's weird is in this particular era of Counter-Strike, it felt like these were almost the kids where they weren't like bad kids, but they were almost like their version of being a bit like naughty was going to the LAN cafe and playing games or something. Like, what was this environment like? It must have been a bit of a weird environment to grow up in, like new rules and stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how many fights I saw at PC cafes, and there were stabbings, and like I don't want to focus so much on like the negative things of PC cafes, because like it was the pioneer of everything. It was there, and games are awesome. I love games, but there was a little bit of an aspect where there was people that maybe ditching school. Me personally, I ditched school and I would go to these PC cafes, and so you kind of get that kind of crowd there for a while. And although that did kind of like fizzle out, you started seeing just people that were just going there to game because they enjoyed gaming, and kind of got rid of like the bad people, banned them, whatever. But yeah, so it was interesting growing up during that time. I would be going to like, I don't want to say like ghetto areas, but like those types of areas like had more gang activity and whatnot. But then once I kind of just started going to my more local cafes, because I grew up in Irvine, California, which is a pretty known to be a pretty safe city. So once I started just focusing on, it was called Cyberdeck, and that was my first. It was a Cal Maine team that we took to Cal Invite, which later became Jin. So,
did you actually find, like, this is obviously a bit of a soft question, but I'll ask it anyway, it ties into the topic. So you were actually quite known among the teams, and in fact among the players in NACS. A lot of them famously, like, I always thought the reason why North Americans weren't as good at the CPLs, it wasn't just like they're not as good, blah, 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 Europeans have all these advantages. So a lot of them actually just sort of played worse on LAN. Like, they would super duper all-stars on the internet, and there were so few LANs back then. I mean, by the time you're good, like, it might be your fourth LAN, you're playing like the SK Gaming from Sweden or something. So I get why a lot of people choked. Do you think having this background where you essentially from day one are playing on LAN, and not only that, in this environment, like, look, you have to be confident, like, this guy might kick your ass if you lose the game or if you beat him, like, do you think some of that helped?
Yes, absolutely. Growing up, I didn't have like I had a computer, but it wasn't a good enough computer to play Counter-Strike on, and I also didn't have like a really good internet connection because the cable in my area was really, really slow. So going to LANs and kind of just being a LAN hopper, where I'd just be going to different LANs, every weekend for the fun of it with some friends, and I think that really helped as far as preparing me for the LAN style of play, and just playing in the LAN pub servers, getting used to that ping. The 5 to 10 ping was just way better than playing online where you're 50 to 60 to 100 even.
When you came to, like, you were in the team like Jin, for example, and briefly in some of these other squads, but not in the most famous lineups like Die, GX, these were all the squads, if people know these teams back then, they will all remember these names, basically, right? When you were in these teams, were you actually always good at Counter-Strike? Was it when you started trying to go pro? Was there a specific team where you took sort of a jump up in? I remember Jin was the team, I remember seeing you did put the POVs online, and some of them were pretty sick, and you were owning people, etc.
Yeah, I would say when I first realized I was good and like had potential was just a little bit before Jin was in Cyberdeck. And the reason why is I just felt like I was carrying that team constantly and making strats for that team. And I was just very focused on the game and strategically just always wanting to win. And then when we went to Jin, that's where I got to play with some higher, more well-known players, I guess you could say, and really like took control of that team as well, developing strats and strat calling and game leader and all that. And that's kind of where it really took off, I would say, was Jin, and getting to that first CPL with them. And the way I performed was, It was pretty damn good. Even though we didn't get too far, I think I kind of made a name for myself at that point and started, and then it all just went from there.
Because one of the interesting things was there was this brief period, it's a team that everyone will have forgotten about now, but there was a team you joined called Forsaken, which was simultaneously infamous because famously the clan leader was Funk, a guy who not only was not very well liked, but he was very famous for clan hopping himself and being in a million different teams. There used to be a lot of memes around it back then. But this was an example of where one thing he was actually bizarrely good at was how the part of the reason he was in a million teams, he would always like convince the new set of people that they did want to play with him, and he would get like some new players, and he was good and bad at the politics of the scene, if that makes sense. And in this particular edition of the team they made was the one where I remember I was actually friends with Warden at the time, who was in the team, and I remember him telling me, like, basically because he himself had like some LAN he'd gone to, some CPL where he'd failed with like Green Berets. He said basically this team is like the misfits of like the scene. Like, we're actually all really good. Like, I remember Storm was around at the time, but people thought he was a cheater, and you had obviously some of your future teammates, Masternook, etc., people who'd been on teams that again had been very good but maybe hadn't done as well at the LANs. And he was like, for real, don't sleep on this team, we're actually really good. Because I remember at the time, if people know the way the NA scene worked, you didn't have a spot to actually play an invite. You even had to play through like bloody main or something ridiculous where, if people don't know, even if you're actually CPL players, you just play against cheaters who, like, it's impossible to win in the playoffs and stuff. Like, the joke is the main playoffs is actually harder to win legit than a CPL because everyone's just cheating. So I remember in this particular team, even online, the team was looking good but was playing crap competition, and you came to this CPL, and even though like the placing was like 9th to 12th or something, there was like loads of close games against like the best teams. And actually, if this team had continued, this team could have been good because it basically was the heart of what became Rival, GamerCo, and a bunch of the other players, by the way, became Complexity, who was obviously a mega team the next year. So was this team a significant step up? It seems like this is when you got the really good teammates finally.
Oh yeah, I can't tell you how much I actually enjoyed that team. That team was really solid. Storm, like you said, probably just one of the best players during that time. Warden was great as well. Torres, amazing as always. And then Warden great. And like you said, we were kind of looked at as misfits. People even questioned me as possibly cheating online until I started going to these CPLs and really proving myself. That Forsaken team was really solid, and we could have gone very far. I'm not sure what came to the demise of it. I think it was we kind of were working towards having a more local West Coast team between me, masternook, Destructo, but that team was very solid for being spread out across the states. Funk, man. I mean, as much flack as that guy got, he was actually, a great mind for Counter-Strike. He had great experience, and he brought a lot to the team, so although he gets all the flack, he was a big part of that team as well. But, yep.
Yeah, I know I've heard similar things from other people. They just said it's more like in private he was a cool guy. He just kind of came across badly on the internet, and obviously in public he just had a bunch of drama he was involved with. Right, one of the things I want to ask about though, and along these lines, was when you then the next year got to be part of Rival and GamerCo, even then, right, people are going to think we're going to skip together and like get all the CPL success. No, I actually want to ask a different question, which is a period in time that again has just been deleted from history. So if people remember the story, on the internet already, this Rival team you made was really good. It had the players, like you said, Destructo was one of the best up-and-coming NA players, like loads of really good players and people who are really experienced. But the problem is, right before, there was an ESWC qualifier. And at the time, ESWC was just being established as like a big international competition. They'd only had the first one the year before. This is when they were going to have the next one. And finally, there was like a proper NA LAN qualifier for it. And if people don't remember the story, because technically the way the tournament worked is, even though it wasn't like World Cyber Games, you didn't all have to be from the same country. There was actually a rule where you had to have like something like 3 of the 5 players had to be from a region for you to attend that region's qualifier, so that obviously, like the 4th best Swedish team doesn't go to like NA and they just qualify, So famously, NOA, which was like all the obviously international players, Element and all these fuckers, they took Destructo from Rival here, used him just to qualify to this tournament, and then basically like he just sort of retired after that, and that was it. But in doing so, they actually sort of crippled your team because he was one of the best players along with you on the team. And I remember, this is the story I want to get to. At the qualifier for this ESWC, your team Rivals didn't make it, right? But you did play super well individually. And this is the story no one remembers, dude. I'm the only person in the world. Me and Jason Lake are probably the only ones who remember this. You joined Complexity for 1 week and you never played a single match. Do you remember this? You joined officially and everyone, and this is when they were first making the Complexity. It was going to have like fraud. So everyone at the time was like, this was one of the first big signings he was making because, you know, you just tore up the LAN. So it's like, oh, it's great. What happened? Because it was only for a week. Like I said, like you sort of like went back on the deal before it happened. So give me this story. What happened?
Yeah. We just had come off that tournament. I think we beat 3D there. We didn't end up qualifying. I think we lost to either U5 or TSG. Can't really remember. But yes, Jason Lake was reaching out to me about possibly joining. And this was before Cole was like, I think it was Warden on the team. Maybe Warden was on the team, Bullseye, and then 3 other.
I think it was a bunch of bad players after that.
I can't even remember, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, it was almost like at that time I was like it's kind of too good to be true. He's gonna like maybe possibly pay me and whatnot. And, like, because no one got paid salary during that time. You know, we were just playing for the pride and, like, you know, this little prize pool for tournaments. So I was like, oh, this could be a good opportunity for me, like maybe make some money and whatnot. And it ended up, you know, I ended up leaving for such a brief time. And I think what really got me back was, like, you know, I'm kind of giving up my pride, my like, I don't know. I'm not going to win with this team. You know, I noticed after a few scrims, I'm like, this team's not going to win anything, you know? And, you know, on top of that, I kind of felt bad. You know, I ditched my team when, you know, we had such a good thing going. It's like, so I decided to, you know, make that move back to my team. But, you know, what's interesting, though, is Cole did end up, you know, moving on and, like, recruiting players and becoming, you know, one of the best teams in North America as well. So who knows what would have happened if I stuck it out. Maybe I could have been on that team, or maybe, you know, things could have been different. You never know.
Because one of the weird things is, like I said, this is why I set the story up this way. With that result, even when you go back to Rival at the time, it's like no one can actually expect teams to be good. You just took one of the best players you had on the whole team. So what's ridiculous is coming into that CPL Summer, I remember nobody had this team placing at a high placing, and also famously, your team wasn't that good on the internet because A, the ping, you're all on the West Coast, and then B, let's just be real, like some of your players, I think even you, it didn't seem like you really gave a fuck about the Cal invite games. I mean, if people don't know, there was no anti-cheat, spoiler, definitely some pros were cheating. Some of them even admitted it to me back in the day. And then 2, there was no fucking prize money either. Essentially, it was just playing like for the fans almost, wasn't it? So, did you care about the online play? I feel that's why your team was always underrated. You never really tried to win the Cal invite, did you?
Yeah, I mean, we practiced and we cared. I mean, we didn't like losing, as you could see. Like, we did shit talk a lot, especially when we were being, you know, screwed over by ping-wise, which happened, I can't tell you how many times. And I even felt like I was being packeted, I swear, like my whole career, just like my internet was garbage. So I wouldn't say we didn't care per se, but, you know, it wasn't our main priority because we knew what we could do on LAN in person, and we knew that's where our bread and butter was essentially.
I will say, and just because it might tilt you, just to tell you, so I'll tell you for comedic effect. There were players back then, dude, you could probably even guess some of them who knew me back then. They even told me outrageous shit. This is how bad people were on the internet back then. They'd say, this is a cool story, dude. They would tell me, like, oh, when we're doing, like, the deciding the ping on the servers, I would just, like, pull the RJ45 cable off the PC really quickly and put it back in. Then when it would spike, like, and I'd go, like, I'm having packet loss, we can't play on this server. And they would just do this, and if you know the players I'm on about, they were, like, CS royalty at the time. They could just get it so that, like, all of a sudden the server's just moving further and further east. You're just playing like Texas or something at that point, and you're like, what the fuck? And they have like you have like twice their ping at that point, right? Like, I get it, mate. If you're in that world, like, fuck those guys. That must be so annoying.
Yeah, it was just triggered us for sure. Like, I can't tell you how many times I just, you know, we end up on a Chicago, and it's just like, it's not even just that the ping's bad. It was just like the registering of the shots was just garbage, and you know, at that point, it's like, why am I even playing? Like, this is just pointless, you know.
Did you get, like you said there, like one of the weird things about your team was, funnily enough, because I said of the LAN online aspect, people used to actually accuse your teammates of cheating a lot of the time. Obviously, like these players used to get accused all the time. Did you actually think that other people in Cal Invite cheated? Because I know you were somebody who definitely either from shit talking, or I felt like some losses you felt like there's no way this team's actually that good. They beat us on the, like, they wouldn't win on LAN. There was some of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna like sugarcoat it. I mean, I'm pretty sure every pro player has cheated at some point. Maybe not in actual like match play,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I mean, I loaded up hacks just to fuck around and see where like I could spam through and all that kind of stuff. I did cheat in one match. I will be honest.
Okay.
The reason why I say that is because I was almost positive that the team we were playing was cheating as well.
That's also a
So
classic
we were
story
like,
that people do it. Yeah, exactly. You
yeah.
do it
So
when
we're
you
like,
thought they're
you know
cheating.
what?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, we're like, you know what? Like, if they want to cheat, okay, we're gonna cheat. And the irony of it, the one match that I did cheat in, we lost. So it was just like,
There you go.
it's so pointless, you know. Um, but that's not to say like I mean like I wasn't a habitual cheater by any means. It was just that one match. um, and yeah, there was a lot of accusing of people cheating. When I look back and I think about it, like I was accused of cheating like throughout, early on in my CS career, and like thinking back, I'm like, well, the way I did play and the shots I was hitting were just ridiculous. So I don't blame them. And I actually see that in today's professional gaming, like Valorant, like where I'll see these kids just doing like amazing flick shots, and I'm just like, man, that guy must be cheating. And then I'm thinking, well, maybe he's just some 17-year-old kid that's been
Right.
playing 16 hours a day
Sure.
and you just have amazing flick shots. So, yeah, that's that.
The question I have then is, since we're going to now talk about the successful periods where your team was having these amazing third places at what essentially was the World Championship, right? If people don't know, back in this particular era, there was one team ever. It was called Team 3D/X3. It was the same core players from all of CS history. Now, this team was allowed to sometimes have a chance to win or place top 3 because these were basically the players from day one in NA that were the best. They were the rare team that had the sponsors. And they had all the professional sheen, right? If you were that team and you played amazing, maybe you could come top 3. But at the time that we're talking about now, for an NA team that isn't Team 3D, just making top 8 was considered like success. Like if you crack top 8 and then, maybe you win like, one of those like 5th place decider matches, you finish 5th instead of 6th. That's actually considered back then like a really good result for an NA team. So when your team broke out and was having these third places, and not just third place, like you would be going for real, like testing the teams that beat you for first and second, like going really head to head with them. This was a big breakout, and it was actually a kind of like in a development of the NA scene. So when this happened, my first question is, how was this team actually good in 2004 when you lost your best player? Like people would have thought the team should be worse. It actually should kind of disappear at this point. How did the team, why was it so good, this particular squad?
So I think that team was GamerCo. That team was Medius, Fear, masternook, Exodus, Haynes.
Yes.
Okay. That squad was actually. I mean, given we did lose Destructo, like, those other 4 players were, aside from me, were amazing themselves. It was also, I'd say, like a breakout for Haynes. That guy probably, if I was going to rank any like players best of all time, I'd say Haynes, hands down. I played a lot of LAN with him. Just me and him would be playing online matches together, at his house. Guys, just unreal. We had so much to, not so much to prove. We had nothing to lose at those tournaments. We just felt like, we're good, and we'd go and just headshot. And there was the fact that we just didn't have that much care really like relieved a lot of tension and nerves, I think, and that we were just able to just keep plowing through all these matches and whatnot. I think we even went to the lower bracket, and I'm not sure if it was the first CPL, but it was one of the third place CPLs where we were knocked kind of early on into the lower bracket, where we just dominated the lower bracket and came back from that. And as you said, yeah, we definitely tested these teams. I think there was like a double overtime, triple overtime with SK on Mill that had we have won that, we would have been in the first and second place match, and who knows what would happen. And that match came down to literally like a split second defusal to win. So, it it was crazy. It's crazy.
Did you actually think as a team that your team also had like a special quality to be able to play on LAN? Because as I say, like it almost felt like, even if it wasn't LAN experience, the other NA teams, half of them, if they weren't Team 3D, almost like in their brain, just like they were almost like waiting to get fucking Heaton's autograph after the game. Like they weren't properly believing they could win, right? They didn't really think that they were going to win these matches.
Yeah, I will say, like, one of the most best characteristics and qualities you could have as a competitive gamer is knowing that you can win at any time, and that no matter who your opponent is, you're better than them, and you believe that. As long as you can believe that and believe in yourself, and I know that's cliche to say, but it's true, you could definitely win. You know, like these games are just a matter of, you know, you pressing the mouse button before them and being more accurate than them. Just, you know, although, like, yeah, we play against like SK and whatever, and like, yeah, we know who they are, but like, they don't really know who we are, and we can just dominate and have that element of surprise, I guess you could say. And I think we definitely put it on them and caught them off guard. Several of the Nordic teams and the European teams just had no clue, you know.
So you referenced Haynes, who obviously was the big name in the team and got kind of like the cult following. A player I wanted to ask about is actually a player which I think is one of the most underrated of all time relative to the size of his name. Like if I say the name now, a lot of people aren't going to remember him. And it's Medias, the player in your team, obviously this Asian player, right? All I'll say is this. Even though he wasn't even that super duper, it's not like he had loads of POV demos or he was going hyper. But here's all I'll tell you. This is the player where when I would ask other pro players in private, this was like the sleeper player they all thought was mega. They, like, put it this way, I can tell you right now, Team 3D tried to recruit this guy loads of times, mate, when they needed like a fifth player, when they had Canadians. Like, they always wanted this guy. So who was this guy? Because actually, like I said, I feel like he didn't really get much popularity, but everyone I know, his teammates, his people playing it, they loved this guy. I thought he was mega.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was one of those land-proven West Coast players he was on Weekend Warriors, I believe GX for a while as well. Just totally solid player, very calm player. And I think that's kind of meshed with us really well, as he just, you know, he'd be quiet and he'd get the job done, you know, make the right calls. He's very methodical. So yes, definitely Medias, one of the top dogs for sure. Very underrated, you could say. Yeah, his name wasn't publicized everywhere, but he was definitely putting in work. You know, making definitely some great role player moves, and yeah, so he was definitely amazing.
And then another guy I want to ask about, just because he was a long-time teammate of yours, and I'll just say as well, because he actually, no joke, unironically, would complain if I didn't ask about him in this interview, has got to be fucking masternook, Torres, as you referenced. All you need to know is this, you'll appreciate this, mate. Years ago, but not that long ago, let's say like 4 or 5 years ago, I made either a video or an article, I can't remember what, something where I referenced like Rival and Old School, and he actually, no joke, went and sent like an ESEA private message to me, complaining that I like didn't mention him or like I underrated him or something, and going like, bro, what are you talking about? I used to dominate all the fucking SoCal lands. He had to ban me. I was so good. Like, so if people don't know, he was a very confident player. Some would say cocky. Who would you say this guy is? Who's Masternook?
Yeah, I think Masternook and I have very similar personalities where we're very strong-headed, cocky players. I think that's what drives us to perform at a high level. Masternook's for sure just a solid player, very innovative mind. You know, he brought a lot to our teams as well as far as strategy goes, and, you know, making calls and, you know, thinking of like anti-strats and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, Masternook's definitely one of the greatest players in Counter-Strike history as well.
I wanted to actually ask, because you touched on it there, what was the team structure like in these squads? Because the perception was, and part of it I think is just the fact that like it's just people stereotyping, like they see a bunch of players who were all using all the West Coast slang and they seem like, oh, they're just, bro, what the fuck? Like they all basically made it sound like you guys were like morons. You were just playing like PUG style CS. I'm assuming you had some structure and, you know, people were calling strats and stuff. Give me a sense of what the team was like.
Oh, absolutely. We definitely were not pugs. I mean, we could insert some people here and there if we needed to, but oh man, we had strats. We were very strategic. We would be constantly trying to innovate our strats and improve on our strats and add, you know, if one person goes down, what are we going to like rotate back and go somewhere else and work that site a certain way? You know, strategic flash, smoke, nades, all that stuff. but at the same time, there were shots where, hey, we're just going to do this. We're just going to rush this. And we would just say, hey, let's go plow bomb site A. Let's go plow bomb site B. And it would just be like guns out, headshot, take a site. That's, and there were shots like that as well.
In this particular era, when your team was coming up and having these amazing results at CPL, people don't know this was exactly the same time period where Team 3D, the big name in NA, was falling off, basically. They were actually having all these terrible CPL results. And if people can't remember, it was only basically the World Cyber Games used to sort of save them every year because, bizarrely, they would just be terrible all year and then go and win the World Cyber Games. No one even fucking really knows why. It doesn't really make sense. But when they were at these events, right, the problem was this, and this is the issue I want to talk to you about, right, because it actually is endemic to the whole NA scene. One of the big problems North American Counter-Strike has had, and by the way, it basically has it to this day, it's just somehow in the culture, is when you're the legendary player who was the best, like you were the ironclad best once upon a time, not only are they always in denial when they start to fall off a bit, but because they're falling off and someone else is finally beating them and overtaking them, it's like in their mind, they can't acknowledge that not only can they get worse, but someone else can genuinely improve. They always seem to have like a static mind frame of like, I'm always going to be the best. And if you were like below me 2 years ago, you're always going to be shit compared to me. And I can tell you right now, I was even friends with some of these guys, but they had a massive problem with this dude. Like they really believed in their brain. Like if anyone ever beat them in Cal Invite, you're cheating, or we would beat you on LAN. If you even went to LAN and succeeded, who gives a fuck, the douchebags. Like there was a million excuses and reasons. And unfortunately, I always got the sense it actually kind of ruined the NA scene because on the one hand, these teams you'll notice tended to only recruit the people who didn't shit talk. Like, yeah, they'll recruit bombs or maybe they'll ask media. So it's either the people least likely to ever type anything new in a server. But if you're like you even if you were twice as good as them, you would never even get asked to join their teammate. Like, as far as they're concerned, like you committed the ultimate sin ever that you ever like trash talked them in a game, or God forbid you beat them in a game. That's the ultimate sin. Like, what did you think back then? This used to be whack, dude. Like, why does it have to be like a civil war all the time?
You're definitely right about that, man. It was pretty toxic. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I mean, we said a lot of crap to each other, and
because you were kind of poking at him a bit, right, when you saw him falling.
Yeah, I mean, that's just part of our play style, I guess. It's just kind of you get in the mind of your opponent and kind of crack them that way. It's just a mental warfare kind of thing. But I think I still struggle with that today. I don't think anyone's better than me at Valorant. I'm the best Valorant player.
Okay.
So I think it's just it might be a mental health issue at this point. No, I'm just kidding. It's just when you get that to that level, I think you're right. You kind of do have like a little bit of a denial when you may lose to like some people that you may thought of as scrubs, And I remember losing, maybe a local LAN tournament here and there with my pickup teams to like, maybe a more formidable team. And just being like, oh, well, they only beat us because, we're a pug. So, but, the reality was, people were playing a lot more and more. And the more you play the game, the better you get. And that's when I kind of noticed my skills dropping off, is when I wasn't putting in the time, going into pub servers, going into death matches and really playing every day. And that's kind of when I noticed my skills were dropping off. At the time, I didn't, tell myself that, but looking back on it, it's like, yeah, I wasn't putting in the time like I was, initially going pro.
One thing I also noticed was different about your teams and the West Coast teams because of this culture we described earlier was whereas another problem I always saw with some of the NA top teams is you'd have an NA top team that was only good on the internet because they just don't have the LAN experience, and they'd also get to LAN. And I think the other culture shock for them was, guess what? People could be like right over you playing the game and they might be talking shit to you while they're beating you, and your team used to love that, right? You have psychological warfare as a part of the game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a lot of a West Coast thing. Was most of the West Coast teams were very they'd be jawing a lot, during matches. The louder you get, every round you win, every kill you get, the other team's hearing that and they're just kind of defeating them, mentally. So it was kind of like one of the tactics that we would use for sure, just to get really loud.
When you were in these teams, like obviously GamerCo was the one where it had the sponsorships and stuff. Later on, you had the team briefly, the Schwan, where they got the CompUSA sponsorship and stuff, right? In this time, Obviously, I'm sure it's not a problem, so you can tell me how much you can say it. Give us some insight. Like, you were in, like I said, a team that was placing consistently top 3 at the World Championship. You online, you were still one of the best teams. In general, you just one that, like, if doing a world ranking, you'd easily be the top 10 team in the world, obviously, right? What was the finances like back then? Like, for example, was GamerCo a real org that could give you like a salary? Did they just pay the expenses? Were you actually ever in a position where you felt like you were a true professional in like the business sense?
That's a good question. At that time, I think I thought what we had was being professional, like being able to flown out to places, kind of have per diem for food. And I thought that was a big deal at that time, And for that time, it kind of was compared to every other team, other than 3D, I don't even know if they had salary during the time.
They did, but they were the only one, I think.
Okay, yeah. So if they were the only one, So, and then maybe Cole.
Yes, sure. Once they got going, yeah.
Yeah. So I still felt like a professional by the standards of just being able to go travel the world to tournaments, paid for, food paid for, hotel paid for, and I'm just like, and then the prize money goes to us. It wasn't like we had to give the sponsors any sort of money back. So I considered myself a pro, but looking back on it now, it's like, oh man, like we were definitely the pioneers. We should have been paid and whatnot. GamerCo, the organization was, it was solid. I think we just kind of lacked, more sponsorship backing, because during that time there wasn't really many sponsors getting into
for sure
gaming tournaments. So the money wasn't really there because 3D took Nvidia, they took Intel, they took all of these sponsors, and they weren't willing to, those sponsors at the time weren't willing to like do a second, third, fourth team like they do nowadays. So yeah.
One thing I always thought was a bit unfortunate about your guys' career was, first of all, because you never won the World Cyber Games qualifier, because that like loops in, it was always Team 3D who won it. Your team actually very rarely travelled abroad, though. I mean, to be fair, at the time, a lot of NA teams did just wait for the CPLs, etc. And so as a result, there wasn't any real like big trips to Europe for the events, etc. So the only time, and this is the story I want to talk about now, was when you went to the famous World Esports Games, this tournament in South Korea, where this is the downside. You never really got to experience like the European events, because those were like CPLs. You go there for 3 or 4 days. You just try and be good on those days. You try not to let jet lag get you, and you go home. It's a normal tournament. The problem with this tournament, which is why I wanted to bring it up, is because it was an experimental approach where if it was more like actually comparable to something like what esports is like now, where a tournament can last weeks and weeks. And the whole point of this tournament was it was on television in Korea. So you didn't also, unlike a CPL, well, I'll give you the best example is when you said before that one of the rival or GamerCo lineups early on dropped into the low bracket at CPL and had to do an epic run. If you went back and looked, an epic run in the CPL would take 2 days. You just play like 8 matches or whatever. In this format, you used to play like 1 match and it would be like TV day, and then like another maybe 2 days later, you play the next match, then maybe a week later, you play the match after. So I always thought, for me, it's no wonder the results were up and down in this tournament, because no one had ever played this kind of format. It was like a totally new way to play Counter-Strike. And on top of that, you don't just go meet your teammate and play for 3 or 4 days. You had to stay for like a month in Korea, and you're in the chalets with each other. And again, if this is in the era like I'm talking about, where you know your teammates online mostly, and then you boot camp with them. Now it's like you're just living with them. They're just there every day. And I have to say, based on the stories I heard, mate, it sounds like your team was one of the ones where this environment was the worst ever. It seems like it almost killed the team, right? Give me some thoughts. It doesn't seem like your team could handle living together, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, when you're living with someone or people, in close quarters, it wasn't like, we're in like some big house, it's just like kind of like, I mean, the first WEG, it was these little like kind of cabin things, and we had our whole team in like, it was like a 2-bedroom, but with like bunk beds. It looked good on paper, and then like you go and you're just like living with these people, and it's not that like I have any sort of like, resentment for any of the people, but I think you just kind of like get annoyed by people and the way they live, and like, how they carry themselves on a day-to-day basis, and you're like, what the heck, and then, you practice, because we had like little practice rooms or PCs, and practice, doesn't go well. It's not like you can go do something to get your mind off of it like you would if you were practicing online or whatnot. you're just still stuck and you're like having that anger, the animosity of just like losing a scrim or whatnot, and just being like not wanting to play with each other at that moment. You need a break, but you can't go take a break because you're stuck inside this little area. So it was kind of like, you weren't really given much of a way to like kind of cool down or like get away for a little bit, especially in the first WEG. The first WEG, we were just kind of in the middle of nowhere. So, and like you said, that format where you're going to the television studio, you're playing your match, and it's just that one match. And at that point, it's like, well, whether or not that match went well or not, you're staying there all day waiting for the other matches, and then you get bussed back, and it's just like it was a lot different compared to playing in a tournament. We're playing games back to back, and you're fresh, you're ready to go. So it was definitely an interesting experience. And during that time, we had it was us and NOA, I believe, and we both had the same manager. Right. And I don't know if you know that drama, but I think that manager himself was.
I remember it was implied he stole the money, right? that was what people said, at least, right?
Yeah. I mean, he definitely did that, and he just also was just a very toxic person in general. Where I think he kind of manipulated, kind of did a lot of puppeteering behind the scenes to cause more problems for our team, especially.
In what sense are you talking about?
Kind of pitting people against each other. So it is what it is, but there's no hard feelings between all the teammates. I think we all we love each other, we care about each other. We talk occasionally still. There's nothing but love there. The only person I think I haven't been able to get a hold of in a long time, and I hope he sees this and reaches out, is Exodus. So hopefully we hear from him soon. And if anyone knows his whereabouts, tell him to hit us up.
Certainly. Yeah, if people don't know, one of the friendliest players from the West Coast, certainly. I mean, as I said, put it this way, the others were all just talking shit. I mean, you were. Everyone was just talking shit to me at the time. He's probably one of the only nice guys who actually was trying to reach out and all that. Right, here's a question I have then. After this was a team which is, I mean, everyone else is going to forget this as well, but after this was when your team, the next year, or the same year as WEG, made like this attempt to make a West Coast super team, which at the time was going to have all sorts of sponsorship, because it was like you got the Ouch sponsorship and stuff. And if people don't know, for real on paper, this lineup did look fucking amazing. Like, it was like loads of the star players, like all the people like Keane that were looking amazing in other squads. But unfortunately, this team was terrible. Like, you went to the CPL, they had a really bad placing. Like, first of all, for someone who's had so much success at the CPLs, it must have been a massive shock for the team to do that badly. And then, what do you think went wrong? Because as I say, on paper, this team should have been way better than it was, right?
Yeah, absolutely. On paper, that team was great. I would like to say it just came down to just chemistry, and that's just what it is. Like you see it in all sorts of different sports where you have the best players on the team in the league even, and they don't perform well. You saw that with like the Lakers when they had Karl Malone, Gary Payton, Kobe and Shaq, and they weren't able to get it done. So, it happens. And I think that was the case there. Also, just a different style of play. You can't have like 3 in-game strat callers. It doesn't work. You need to have different players, different roles, and they adhere to those roles, or else it's going to just, then they're playing outside of their comfort zone if they're not, and that's not how they play well. So I think that was the case with that team, unfortunately, because we had the great sponsor, the financial backing there, and it just didn't work out.
And then the following year, you were playing with the Pandemic team, which again was like a team of like West Coast, but again it was some similar players, masternook, etc. What do you think this era was like? Like, what was the premise of this team?
So I just want to hold on. So before that, I think there was JMC. I don't know. Do you remember much about me on JMC? They had asked me to go to ESWC with them. So we went out to Paris for one ESWC with JMC.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So, and we performed pretty well there. I think we beat Virtus Pro. But other than that team wasn't very successful. Of the core people in the GamerCo rival, it was Exodus, me, and Haynes, and then I think we had Desire and Hostile on that team. Performed pretty well, but not, obviously didn't get too far in the tournament, but that was also a great experience. But yeah, going back to what you're saying, the pandemic team, that team was pretty solid as well. We had Keen, Dafsta, masternook. There was
GRT, Garrett, if you remember.
GRT, yes, Garrett, awesome player as well. So that team was pretty solid. I think we went to the buy.com LAN and we won that. We almost lost in the final match. I think we were one round away from losing, and we came back like 11 rounds straight to win. That was wild. So that team was pretty solid within itself. We went to WSVG New York, I believe. Had some success there as well versus NIP, I think it was. And it was a good run with that team as well.
What happened in your case? Because if people don't know, this year we're talking about like 2006 is the year we're on right now. The end of 2006, if people remember, was when famously like CGS was announced, Championship Gaming Series, which was going to be on cable TV and all this jazz. And at the time, everyone was mega hyped for it. And even though it quickly emerged that CS 1.6 wouldn't be one of the games, it was going to be CS Source, as people who are familiar will know, basically almost everyone who was a pro in NA just said, right, well, fuck it. The difference is you get like a full-time, you get like basically a real salary. You get like 25k or something to play. So even if Source isn't my game, if they will accept me, I'm going to try and join this league. And famously, probably the weirdest thing about that time was all the actual good Source players, like half of them didn't even get into CGS. Meanwhile, almost everyone who was a top pro in 1.6, because the owners of the teams were 1.6 people generally, they all got in the league, even if they weren't actually good at Source. So one thing I want to ask was this: did you actually at the time ever think of trying to go to CGS? Did you ever try playing Source? It seemed like you just stuck around, and then this is kind of when things faded out for you, right? Did you have interest in Source or playing in CGS? What were your thoughts on it?
So I think we did the pilot. I didn't want to play Source. It just was a new game, and although some of the mechanics were the same, it just wasn't my I kind of felt like I was selling out at that point.
Right.
And I didn't want the 1.6 community to just die, because that's pretty much where it was heading. So I didn't really have much of a desire to play it. Everyone, wanted to, and, I respected that. And it was definitely political as far as the CGS having the 1.6 managers all kind of pretty much just recruit all the Counter-Strike 1.6 players, which is, and there were some Source players that did get through.
Yeah.
But it definitely was mostly the 1.6 players. So yeah, I kind of stepped down at that point, and I actually watched some of it here and there, and I actually worked for CGS for a little bit, and kind of just a little bit behind the scenes. So it was it was good and bad for Counter-Strike at that time. You're killing the 1.6 scene while trying to pioneer and move along like the big contracts, the sponsorships, the big money into gaming. So I kind of just looking back on it, I'm like, it was kind of a good thing to move the culture forward and get these players the money that they should be getting.
You actually did, before we just talk about some other things, you did actually technically play at what to me is like the last CPL for CS, which everyone thinks is 2006, right? Because famously, the story connects. 2006 is the one that had all the big European teams, Fnatic, all the fucking Poles, all the mega players there, right? Spoiler, the reason they weren't in 2007 is no one got paid any of the prize money. So they all just basically said, you know what, we're not even fucking coming anymore. If you don't pay us, we're not paying in the hopes that if we come to this one, you'll pay us for the last one, but then we'll always be one behind. And by the way, they were correct. Because as far as I know, wasn't this the CPL where they just didn't pay anything whatsoever? And then that was it, right? That was the end. No one did CPLs anymore.
Yeah, talk about a depressing downfall. Like, I remember walking into the ballroom of that CPL and just seeing like no sponsor booths, very few sponsor booths, and just being like, what is going on here, And it was just a shame, like to see where it was heading. You're like, okay, this is dying out, and I can't. Oh, I played with a team called Frenetic there.
Yes,
I think that was, and I think we got third or something.
Yeah.
Something stupid. So another third place for me. It's hilarious. So, gosh, yeah, it was awful. And then like just to not be paying the people the prize money. Just that also hurt, the gaming scene as well. So, yeah, that kind of stuff happened quite often, more than you would hope in the scene. But now I think it's gotten a lot better. So that's great.
Was any of this sort of ambience, the mixture of people going to CGS at the time, no one knew if there'd ever be a 1.6 again? It was, at least, listen, in Europe it was played, but in NA it was considered sort of like a dying game, a relic of the past. Everyone now was into CGS and Source and blah, blah, blah. Right? Was any of this connected to why you just stopped playing CS professionally? Like, was there a specific moment or a trigger or something? How did it happen? How did you just, at this point you played for years and years and years. We're talking like 5 or 6 years trying to go hard. So when does it happen, at the moment that you just transition out and you stop being a gamer in terms of being a pro?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, as I kind of just realize, by my age, and then when I realized, okay, I'm not willing to like put in the time and effort to learn this new game, because essentially it was kind of a new game where I had to learn like, the right peak spots and all that stuff, the movement again and all that, flash angles and just all of that stuff. And that's a lot to kind of just like keep up with. It requires hours and hours and hours. And then with not being in CGS, I wasn't going to go and try and do this on my own time without any money. I started realizing, okay, like I'm like 20, I don't know what it was, like 23, 24 or something like that. And I'm like, all right, I got to figure something out. And that's when I just kind of dropped gaming at that point. I kept in touch a little bit here and there, but it was just like, at that point, the professional scene was done for me.
When you were a player and you were at your peak, how would you describe your skill set? Like, what were your strengths? What were you good at? What made you better than other people?
I would say my drive, and just the amount of time I would spend on, like just preparation, strategy, watching other teams, good teams, and learning their tendencies and what they tend to do, and taking their strats and possibly improving them, stuff like that. But mostly I think my strength was just being able to perform on the big stage without being nervous. I cannot recall a time where I was ever nervous at a tournament. Like, and then, there's people that say, oh, that guy was shaking and stuff like that. And it's like, I just never felt that way ever. So that was probably one of my biggest strengths.
How would you describe your personality as a competitor? Because put it this way, I would say, I've seen some of this myself, but I would say if I asked other people, they would have just said back then, people who weren't on your team, it seemed like you were just angry all the time. You're just a super intense guy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think I was ever like angry, but I definitely wanted.
There's always a bit of edge though to everything you were saying.
Yeah, I wanted to definitely come off as just like, a player that, I think I'm better than you. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to destroy you and show you, I'm going to back up the talk. I'm going to walk the walk, talk the talk. And I think that was my edge as well.
You joked there like another third place because you kept having all these, but it just always was third place was the good result for you, right? Normally, like I said, with the context earlier, I've heard people unironically, I'll even say some of them, if you remember that like fucking team that had like, I'm trying to think what they were even called now. There was a team that finished like 7th at one CPL. They were like something like, I can't even remember the bloody name now. It was one of those like online Cal invite teams. And that's all they did was come 7th at one CPL. And mate, they talked for the next 6 months. You'd have thought they won the CPL the way they were talking, like they were talking mad shit. Right, I get the vibe from the way you're talking that some of these third places, you're actually like, fuck, maybe we could have won that. Like third's actually, because if people don't know, if you're actually good enough to win, third sucks.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that team you're talking about was E7.
There you go. That was the one I was thinking. They were the ultimate onliner example, weren't they? Like, there's no way they were going to do that again.
Yeah, that guy Enigma, man. Yeah, and I think the third place, we were like, oh man, like we were excited. That was a great finish. I think I remember walking back to the BYOC to like a standing ovation in the BYOC. It was just like, wow, we threw it down for America that year. And then the second one, like you kind of look back and you're just like, man, if we could have done these rounds better, if we would have won that round, like we could have moved on. And like, so it definitely has some like flashbacks and think about like, oh, if this didn't go wrong, we would have won this tournament, and like definitely lived with that for a while, so it's just what it is, though. You look back, third place isn't that bad, but during that time, man, we were just like, we could have taken this tournament. We could have been, number one in the world as opposed to 3. So.
Do you think in terms of like raw skill and aim, how up there were you? I remember back then you had a very good deagle, for example, which is usually a pretty good sign people have good aim.
Sure. I think as I went on as a professional, I think my aim wasn't what I was relying on as much. I think early on in my career, I relied heavily on my aim, my reflexes, and all that. But as I got a little bit older, I think I was more focused on like the mental side of it, the strategic positioning, and just making the better play as opposed to just relying on the flick shot. We had people like that on my team, so I didn't really have to do that. Send Haynes in, he'll headshot 2, possibly die, and then I'll come in, finish out the round, with the mental play. So, like I said, so in the beginning of my career, probably great aim, great reflex. Towards the end, more just like mental and just experienced plays.
One other thing I wanted to ask about was, like I said, with that story about how for NA it was just typically like you were expected to be like second-class citizen if you went to a CPL event. It wasn't expected you were going to win or be a top placing. And if you face anyone, especially Nordic, they're just supposed to be like the best teams and we're better, etc. Right? One thing I always thought was interesting was though, because in the scene you played in, you got to play in the era when you almost got to sort of humanize the Nordic players because some of them came to NOA and other. I mean, obviously some of them played in your team at WEG. We were dark for that period of time. An element played to CPL with you guys. So like at this kind of time, did playing with these guys on LAN and actually get to practice with them, did that give you a different side to what the Europeans were like? It wasn't just playing them across in an official match once a year or something,
Yeah. We had Dark, we had Goodfella who played with us for a while. And man, those were great players as well. And yeah, it kind of like you kind of realize, they're just like you and just kind of like obviously language barrier here and there, but yeah, these players were all going to WEG was actually a great experience to practice a lot because we were all in the same area, so we'd scrim each other quite a bit. We got to play like a lot of mouse sports, a lot of the Chinese teams, the Korean teams, and let's see, like 4K. So it was a good experience to kind of like see their different style of play and like their strategies and kind of adapt and take what they're doing and change it as well. Yeah.
Right, obviously, in our day, in the day we're talking about now, this is when, even if you actually were in a team, like, that's in the like World Championship semi-finals, the joke is back then, everyone used to pretend we weren't in esports. It was actually a really bad stigma that you were a nerd, obviously, and so everyone back then, the joke is, you didn't want someone to go, so what do you do for a living? That's like the last question you want to ask, because it's going to be really awkward to explain it. I wanted to ask this, what is it like now? Because I'm sure now it's the reverse, right? In a weird way, if someone brings up a topic of gaming or esports, you almost think like, if I tell them actually I was a pro gamer, they might be like, it's sort of an interesting angle right now. I'm sure people are. So how do you encounter that scenario? Do you ever tell people? Are you actually proud of it? Do you ever brag about it?
Of course, man. You know me. I'm gonna brag every chance I get. No, it's awesome. It's awesome to see where the gaming industry has gone so far. And it's still early, I would say. Like, even though we pioneered a lot of stuff, it still has a good ways to go. And it's still going to just continue growing and growing. It's funny because like my current job, I work with, some people who are a little bit quite younger than me, maybe like 10 years younger than me. And they'll talk about like, oh, this person on Switch, playing this game professional. And I'm just like, I try my best not to say anything, but then I end up, like, hey, yeah, I used to be a pro too. And like, they're like, really? What game? Counter-Strike. Oh, Source? Or I mean, they don't say Source, they say, oh, Counter-Strike Go?
Oh, right, yes.
No, a bit longer than that. Oh,
sure.
Source? No, way before that. 1.6, so it's interesting, to talk about it nowadays. The stigma was pretty bad back in the day. It's like, because, gaming was just like, kids who just stay inside and just sitting on a chair all day.
We were nerds. I always admit it. We were nerds. It's not like we're pretending we weren't. Like we were, of course.
Yeah. And now it's like, opposite where it's cool to do it, so
yes.
it's great, it's cool.
One thing I want to ask was this. Since you were somewhere where, like I say, when you competed, I got the vibe you were quite serious about trying to win. Like, you didn't really care if it was just a meaningless online match, and it doesn't matter to, like, this isn't like nothing happens if you win or lose this game. You try. If you don't, who gives a fuck? You were a guy who was pretty serious. When you finish playing, have you ever found anything else in life that can sort of, like, scratch that itch? I've heard a lot of people have problems with that. Like, even if they don't actually want to play the game anymore, it's like something's missing. You haven't like, going and playing fucking, I don't know, racquetball doesn't really, it's not the same, is it? It's not the same stakes. It's not as epic when you win. Have you ever found anything? Do you have issues with that? Do you ever think about it?
That's interesting. I mean, I've heard of what you're talking about. Personally, no, I never have experienced anything like that. I kind of just transitioned to just like a normal lifestyle of just kind of working and I was working out for a while. I played basketball. And I've always just kind of appreciated and had fun doing that kind of stuff. I still do have that inside of me of like being competitive and wanting to be the best at a lot of things. And I think that's helped me in my life just in general, where, I work hard at whatever I do, with whether it's in my job or, working with my kids and just stuff like that. So I think just harnessed it and used it in a positive way throughout my life.
Do you think that people, because this is a question I always wondered myself, right? Back in the day, they used to always present esports in the worst way possible. They made it sound almost like it was just an open competition and everyone in the world just grabbed a joystick and started playing. And then all of a sudden, 16 teams were at the CPL. And I used to have to explain to people, it's like tennis. It's like there's a circuit and the same people are going to be on top. And the guy who's the best in the world isn't going to go to a tournament and just come 128th. Like, that will never happen. Like, it's actually like sports. But the problem is, obviously back then, it was so hard to explain that to people. And they did just think it was just like, oh, wow, they'd say that whack thing to you, wouldn't they? Like, my grandson's good at, like, Fortnite. So you're like, who gives a fuck? Like, I'm talking about pro gaming, not someone who's just good, right? So my question is this, right? Do you think that people in your generation who were pro gamers, is there a certain, like, makeup of what makes you someone who can be good at games? Were you just good at the game? Do you think you had some qualities that were, like, that actually exist outside of the game that made you good?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, I could kick anyone's ass in Mario Kart, and I think a lot of people know that in the CS pro scene as well. Like, I carried Mario Kart. There was a lot of things, I guess. Yeah, growing up, it was just. I think there was just a part of me where I always wanted to be really good at what I did, and whether it was sports or and whatnot. The gaming was just kind of. It comes naturally to me. I think, I even play games with my kids on like Switch and whatever. Like, I open up Zelda Breath of the Wild and like I got addicted to it, and I just like had to complete everything from start to finish, and just it's still inside of me. I think it's just a personality thing where you just really want to do well, and when it comes to games especially, I think that's where you see it the most.
Right, obviously, it's not as simple as just telling people they can look this up on YouTube, because unfortunately nowadays we didn't have YouTube. I mean, YouTube itself didn't exist in the word VOD, so not everything's going to be on YouTube. But I just want to ask for the sake of completion, right? If we had to tell someone who'd never seen you play CS 1.6 at all, maybe they only came along in CSGO, but they're interested in history, what period do you think was your individual peak? When did you think you were at your absolute best? Like, everything was flowing, my game's on top, got the experience. What team or what era? When was your peak, do you think?
Oh, that's a tough question, because I feel like I went through like different periods of times where, like I was saying earlier, my aim was like precise and really good, early on, and Jin and like rival early. As I went on, it was becoming more of like an experienced mastermind kind of play style throughout, like maybe later on GamerCo and early like pandemic time. So depending on what kind of style you want to see, and don't get me wrong, even during like the experience time, you're going to see some great shooting and all that stuff as well. But, I think depending on what kind of play style you want to see someone do is which time period you want to look at.
Right. By the way, does it feel weird to have played on a team called Pandemic? Were you thinking about that when that started out a couple of years ago?
You know what? I never thought about it till right now. That's hilarious, man.
That's the only other time I think I've ever heard that word used, mate. It wasn't like a famous thing back then, was it?
Oh, jeez. I should go get my Pandemic shirt and put it on right now for the sake of this. Oh,
there we go. Right, okay. My last question is going to be this, right? in your career, I told you, you had like an up and down career. You had periods that were very good. I think overall, generally, people know back in that time period, this was a top team because of the land placings, etc. But as we said, you didn't win the tournaments. Like, if people are going, like, you know, lists of names of the great players, unfortunately, they go with all the people who had the trophies, of course. When you look back on your career, was it satisfying? Do you feel like you got enough out of it? Does it actually feel like it was worth the effort, for example? It wasn't a wasted time or anything?
Oh, absolutely. On top of just like gaming and whatnot, like it was just a good life experience overall. It really built me up as a person. I matured a lot during that time, even though I may have had quite the mouth during that time. I, learned a lot about different cultures, meeting people from all over the world. I mean, not many people get to do that in their lifetime. So we got to experience a lot of things that people will never experience in their lifetime. So super appreciative of it. Totally worth it. Would I do it all again? Hell yes. Especially during this time frame where I'd probably get paid quite a nice
sure
bag for that. So yeah.
Right, at the end of this interview, do you have either a final message or maybe someone, maybe someone you want to thank or give a shout out to or something?
Yeah, sure. Totally. Like all my teammates, throughout those years, all the hard work we did, and to the opponents even, all that hard work we did and all the stuff we did for the scene, shout out to everyone at that point. We all put in so much blood, sweat, and tears, as the saying goes. Like we did so much for the gaming community to be where it's at right now. And it's good to see some of them still in the community involved, whether it be, behind the scenes, and that's awesome. And I say, just keep going, keep growing that sport. But yeah, and shout out to, of course, my parents for always supporting me during those times.
This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadju, Iskander, Matt Pugnatio Rakula, Toucan, Travis Goff, Adam Oaks, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Hades, J-Dubs, Jensen Go, Joy, Joseph Ginsberg, Kovacevic, Tobias Bernasconi, Zumba, Zyrathenia, and a special thanks goes out as always to Jerky's Minion, but also to Jeremy Dole. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? You want to ask me a question for one of my video AMAs? Want teasers? Find out who the guests are. Would you like to take part in a lengthy esports discussion with me? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.